Darrin Porcher joins us now from New York for some further analysis. Thanks so much for being with us. You know, I was speaking to a human rights activist last hour, and though he commended the mayor of Minneapolis for immediately condemning these officers, he also said the ensuing process now, whereby these officers might actually sue to get their jobs back and may not see criminal charges, is where justice will be squandered. Where do you see this case going?
Well, I think that it goes at two fronts, and I can speak to my experience as a practitioner, being a former lieutenant in the NYPD, working in the Internal Affairs Bureau. On many instances, I've investigated cases that are of a similar nature. And one of the things that is going to happen is you're going to have two lanes. It's going to bifurcate into one, an administrative action, which we saw the mayor take swift action and terminate the officers. And that merely amounts to the loss of employment. The second lane would be the criminal justice arena. And that would be, in fact, if a district attorney would be willing to take this case and proceed in a criminal arena. Two completely different entities, but it goes back to when we look at instances like this, many people, use of force is always ugly, so to speak. There's never a good way to view use of force. And I oftentimes have heard the racial dynamic introduced into the as it relates to this particular instance. But believe it or not, we actually have more Caucasians that are killed by police on an annual basis than African Americans. However, statistically, because the African American population is less, you will have, the statistics will weigh in favor of, I should say, a disfavor of African Americans being losing their lives more as a result of police action. One of the things that I constantly hear that's being introduced is the professional development. Professional development should always be something that's ever so evolving within policing. However, I think that it shouldn't be a one-fits-all solution. And oftentimes, based on my experience, police departments train officers from a universal perspective and don't necessarily specifically focus on the socioeconomically impoverished communities. Those socioeconomically impoverished communities have disproportionately high numbers of amounts of crime that are committed in those communities. But in no way, shape, or form should that be an excuse to over-police or present a level of hyper-aggressive policing in those communities.
And we need to remember as well that many members of the police forces themselves are also minorities. They come from some of those marginalized communities. And what they might be guilty of in some of these cases is just simply committing, abuse of power. We watched while that officer in Minneapolis pinned George Floyd's neck. His colleagues really just stood by. They did not try to stop what they saw or would have seen if they had been trained maybe to spot any sort of abuse of power by their colleagues. They didn't try to intervene or stop it. They worked kind of as a unit, from what we can see, at least in that video. So do you think there needs to be a different kind of training among police forces so that this abuse of power, overuse of power doesn't happen?
There's a statement, silence equates to violence. By taking no action, you in terms are complicit in the acts of misconduct that are committed by an officer. And so this is something that's pretty much a standing order on the books in all police departments. Therefore, we saw the mayor come out and take swift action and not just terminate the officer that was responsible for holding his knee on the individual's neck, but the other individuals that were at the location as well. So this is something that's often practiced. This just happens to be an instance where we've heard that the bystanding officers failed to take appropriate action. But as you mentioned, by all means, the officers that took no action, of course, are complicit as a result.
Okay, Darrin, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us.